Now, I don't know if you'd agree, but in my opinion, project management is the most difficult job in the world. There may be other difficult jobs, I'm sure there are, but if you think about it, nothing exceeds project management for difficulty. Because in project management, what we get asked to do is to make a plan, a prediction of the future, and then make the prediction come true. Now, if any of us could actually do that, we really wouldn't be here. We'd be down at the horse racing track. We'd be spending our nights in casinos. We'd be buying lottery tickets if we could predict the future and make it come true. If that wasn't bad enough, we often get asked to make these predictions in a very strange way. So imagine you were having some problems with your car, you took it to the garage, and what you said to the guy in the garage was, I don't know what's wrong with my car, but I need you to fix it in the next hour and I'll give you €50 or $50 or £50. It would be a strange way to ask him to look at your car, but what would be really strange would be if he said this. Sure. And when you came back an hour later, as you drove your car out of the garage, having given him the £50, you'd be saying, what did he do to my car? Did he do anything? Did he even unlock it or look under the hood? And of course, in the setting of a garage, we couldn't imagine such a stupid conversation. But in our kinds of projects, and when I say our kinds of projects, I mean any knowledge-based or high-tech type projects, such conversations are almost routine. Somebody says, here's the project. I don't know much about it, but it's got to be done by this date, for this budget, with these people. Good luck with that. In our company, we think that project management is so dangerous that the moment when the project is given to you is a bit like having a missile fired at you. So here's a missile here. Let's fire it. And there are two types of missiles, a ballistic missile and a cruise missile. So we do the ballistic missile first. The ballistic missile is launched over there somewhere. It comes in like this and we pick it up on our radar screen. We see it coming. So an example of a ballistic missile is your boss calls you into his office or her office and gets a pile of stuff and says, congratulations, Charlie, you're going to be leading the Poison Chalice project. And I hope it'll be good for your career and for mine. So the ballistic missile is the explicit handing over of the project. There's a little event occurs where the project is passed from them to you. But then there's also the cruise missile, the sneaky one. And we're not quite sure where that gets launched. We just know that suddenly it's in the air and it's heading in our direction. So here's an example of a cruise missile. We're at a meeting, we're sitting around a table, and we're on Zoom, I guess these days. And somebody says, hey Charlie, how long do you think that would take? And maybe if Charlie's not careful, she goes, and maybe if she's not really careful, she opens her mouth and gives an answer. Now, I'm not saying any of us do this, but if we do, when we were planning the project, and if we did open our mouth and give an answer, we were making a commitment. These missiles are dangerous because they carry a warhead, the exploding bit. And in project management, they carry a particularly dangerous kind of warhead that we call a binary warhead. And the key is in the word binary. It contains two things which, as long as they're kept apart, they're completely harmless, but once we mix them, they're deadly. And these two things are, first of all, the request itself. Charlie, will you do the Poison Chalice project is an example of a request. But then there's almost always the constraints. And the constraints are the idea that even though I've asked Charlie, how long will that take, Charlie, I already know the answer. Because we can have date constraints. Sales have sold it, marketing have announced it, the boss has promised it, the head office has asked for it, it's in the contract. So we can have date constraints, it's got to be done by a certain date. We can have budget constraints. We can have resources constraints. These became particularly popular after the financial crisis. You had people saying, you've got to do more with less, you've got to find a way, you've got to work smarter, not harder, whatever that's supposed to mean. We may have scope constraints. Maybe the scope of the project has already been put into a contract or something like that. And I hope you can see that if you try to deal with the request and the constraints at the same time, you could potentially get yourself in a lot of trouble. Because on the one hand, as you think about the request, you think of all the stuff you're going to have to do and all the time it's going to take. And the constraints are telling you you're not going to get the time. You should have started 3 months ago. And you're thinking, gosh, I'm going to need 5, 6, could be 8 people to get this project done. The constraints are telling you you'll be lucky to get a man in a dog. And if you try to deal with the request and the constraints at the same time, all that happens is the constraints win. And as a result, we can end up committing to doing things that are difficult to do or completely impossible to do. During the course, we're going to talk about the reasons why projects fail, but it seems to me the number one reason they fail is they were never actually possible in the first place. Somebody said, here's the project, and here are the constraints, and everybody said this terrible word. Now, obviously, our course has to deal with constraints. If this was some kind of theoretical course, like maybe in a university or a research institute or something like that, I could say to you, you shouldn't allow constraints on your project. But that's hilarious, because in the real world that we live in, these are a fact of life. And our course has to deal with those, and it does, but it does it like this. It separates dealing with the request from dealing with the constraints. They're done as 2 separate operations. Now, sometimes when I say this, particularly to people who've done other project management training or have qualifications or courses or methodologies, they say, oh, that's an interesting idea. They didn't tell us that on the other course or in the other method. I've even had people say that it's a radical idea. But it really isn't, because in a million other normal trades and industries and professions, this is precisely what happens. Because when you do take your car to the garage and say to the guy in the garage, there's something wrong with my car, he doesn't say this. This is what he says. He says, I'll have a look at it. And that's precisely what he does. He lifts the hood and he looks around, or he slides it underneath it. And then, having done an assessment, he says, here's the deal. You may be there with your £50, but if he says to you, listen, my friend, you have 3 choices. You can get a reconditioned engine, you can get a new engine, or you can go and talk to the sales guy about getting a new car. You have some decisions to make. So this idea of some kind of analysis of the problem followed by courses of action that we could take, which is common to almost every sensible trade, industry, profession you could possibly imagine, and for some wacky reason isn't common in the kind of projects we do, well, all I'm suggesting is we should do what they do, because it seems to work for them.